Hello, hello, what's up? You are listening to The Long Game, and I'm your host, David Ly Khim, co-founder of Omniscient Digital. In this kitchen side episode, we talk about all things hiring, and more specifically, our lessons learned from running our most recent hiring sprint to bring on 2 content growth strategists. And we share a detailed walkthrough of what our hiring process looks like and how we filter out applicants at every stage. For reference, in our most recent hiring sprint, we had about 300 to 400 applicants, and we ended up hiring 2 people out of that pool. We share some details about the skills and traits that we look for in candidates and how we screen for those things. And we start talking specifically about analytics experience, and ultimately comes down to curiosity. And before we get into it, I want to preface that we get really, really candid and transparent about our hiring process and some of the internal discussions that we have. Some of it might even be tough to hear if you're someone that's currently looking for a role or a new job and having some trouble with that process. And our hope is that this gives you more context about what actual hiring managers are looking for and what they're filtering and screening for in these interviews and in resumes and so on. And our hope for hiring managers is that our conversation gives you some ideas or tips for how you might run a more efficient hiring process. So without further ado, here is our conversation about our learnings from running our most recent hiring sprint.
On the relationship thing, did you ever see that movie with Vince Vaughn and I think it was Jennifer Aniston? The Breakup. I haven't actually seen the full movie, but I saw this clip that reminded me of what you were saying, Allie, where she's like angry that he didn't do the dishes.
He's playing video games?
Yeah, something like that. And he's like, fine, I'll do the dishes. And she's like, no, I want you to want to do the dishes.
I've had that exact conversation before. Oh, man.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
What do you do? What do you do in that situation? It's like, I don't want to do dishes.
That was his argument too. He's like, why would I ever want to do the dishes? That's insane.
I feel like in like relationships like that, I think each person comes into the relationship with like a different way of operating. Like someone might want to do the dishes immediately after cooking, and then someone else is like, I'll do them at the end of the night after we eat. And I think it's just talking about that, but not letting one person carry the weight. I think that's kind of the key, is like, no, you don't have to do this just because I told you to, but like, I want you to want to keep like a clean house. Like that's kind of what it is if you zoom out. It's not really about the dishes. It's more of like wanting to share in the burden.
It's all about communication. That's what I learned from taking that course by Esther Perel, because you often have these ideas in your head, and if you don't communicate them, there's a term called like covert contract. It's like a contract that you made in your brain that you didn't explain to anybody else, and then you get upset or resentful when they didn't do the thing that you didn't tell them that you wanted.
That's a great concept. Wow, that just perfect name for that thing that I've experienced both ways.
That's life. A random one before we dive into topics today. I don't know why I didn't do this years ago, but I've gone full remote work mode, and I wear 2 shirts every day. So I've got like a nice shirt on now, and I've been doing this for client calls where like most of the day I'll wear sweatpants and just like a free t-shirt that I got at a conference or something like that, like super comfy stuff. And then when I get on any call where I have to look presentable, or if I have to go out and meet up for somebody, with somebody for a coffee, I dress up nice. So I wear 2 outfits every day now.
Welcome
do you
to
do
the
this?
dark side. Yeah.
I have wondered if
my bottom half is all pajamas every day. Unless I
wonder
leave
if
the
I
house.
should wear collared shirts though. Like I used to wear nothing but collared shirts in college, and then like early on in my career, and then it became a thing where guys got really dressed up and like wore nice boots and nice jeans and button-ups. I'm like, I'm just gonna go back to wearing t-shirts all the time now. Maybe I should start wearing some nice t-shirts or nice button-ups for client meetings that look more polished.
It's really hard to understand what to do in this remote work world. And have we talked about on the podcast
We've
before?
only been doing this for many years.
Well, we were remote before, but like, I don't know. Like now everything's remote, or like most people are remote first. So it's like, what is the etiquette? It's like going to the office, I feel like I would dress up decently. I don't know.
Yeah.
Even in startup environments, like you'd still look presentable.
Yeah, I remember
I don't know.
I've been remote pretty much my whole career, except for like the first 6 months out of college. And I remember when I was at HubSpot, like I didn't have as many meetings as I do now. And so I would like batch them like Tuesdays, Thursdays. And those days I would like do my hair, do my makeup, do the whole thing. And then the other days I was just like a total slob because I was like writing or doing like heads down stuff. And now like it's very rare to not have a meeting. So I have to find this middle ground of like, the front of my upper half looks great.
I do that often, actually. I'll wear a button down like this, and I'll have sweatpants on,
Yeah.
or like
that
like
feels
shorts or
wrong.
something like that. Well, nobody can see, so it's like upper half.
But
It's,
it just feels wrong to me. If I were wearing that, I'd be like, this bothers me a
Does
lot.
your outfit, David, like affect your productivity and like your mental state?
I used to think it did, and I used to dress well because it made me feel good, but I don't think it does anymore. Maybe subconsciously if I put on
mine
a
definitely
shirt and
does
dress up.
subconsciously.
Yeah.
That's why oftentimes I'll wake up and pretty early in the morning. I mean, for me, I wake up pretty late, but I'll go work from a coffee shop in the morning as long as I don't have meetings, which now that I'm on East Coast time, I don't often have super early meetings because then that makes me get up, get dressed, interact with people. And I feel like that sets the tone for the rest of the day. And I'm much more
100%.
on top of things versus like kind of rolling into the day and like, sweatpants, sitting on the couch. Like, I don't know. It's like a psychological trick, but it seems to work for me.
Yeah, I feel like folks, whether they're new to remote work or not, like it's all about trial and error. Like I do think that there are a lot of experts who have really good advice, a lot of times scientifically backed, but to just blindly follow someone's like to-do list in the morning and not think about like what's really resonating for you, I think that's a mistake. Because I used to do that, and then by the time I got in front of my desk, I was like either exhausted because I was like, this isn't natural for me, or I would just be so resentful. I'm like, this stupid person told me to wake up and do this and do this and do this, and then I'm like not focused on work. So I think it's ultimately like, I don't know, I don't think there's any wrong way to do it as long as you get your shit done.
If there's one thing
What
that
do
I
y'all
know,
think?
it's that we need more thought leadership in this world from SaaS companies about the future of remote work. I think most blogs should transform into being thought leadership about the future of work. There's not enough companies doing that.
Yeah, I need more of that information. I don't know what to do.
Sarcasm.
I've totally changed my mind on remote work. I know we run a remote company, but I am so over it.
I'm just being around people.
I just want to go to the office from 9 to 5, and I want.
It's a pendulum. I'm sure it'll go back, and then it will go back, and it will go back, and it will go back.
I can see you waiting outside like an office building, waiting for someone to go in, and you just like follow them when the door's open. Like, I just need to be in an office, man.
In New York City, just like waiting for them to flash their key card.
Just be like all dressed up, waiting.
Oh my god!
Suitcase.
With like a briefcase.
Oh my god.
Kids, yeah.
Oh man!
So yeah, I really miss being around people. Like this past weekend, me and Lisa were on a retreat with her I guess now classmates because she just started school again. And I was like, damn, this is nice just being around people and everyone's strangers and you just get to hang out and meet up and it's okay to just randomly talk to someone and be like, hey, I'm David,
Yeah.
and just talk. Whereas now I think I'm at my apartment all day or like condo all day. When I go out, it's like there isn't an environment, like a coffee shop isn't exactly an environment to just strike up conversation. So there's no shared environment where you're like expected to just talk to each other like an office, which I enjoyed that. I just enjoyed meeting someone and being like, hey, we should get lunch or something without it being weird.
I think
What about
there's
your gyms?
you don't really meet too many
Gyms?
people. Yeah, I mean like in
I made
jiu-jitsu,
one
you joke.
gym.
People
I made
don't
2
talk.
gym friends.
Gym friends, yes.
It's different. I think there's an emergent value in working together with people that you're actually working with. So, like, I agree on the coffee shop take. I think it's better than nothing because I do think there's some intangible value to like looking other people in the eye and communicating instead of just sitting in your at your laptop all day. But I think too many people probably look at it from a utilitarian sense in that, like, yeah, you can definitely be more productive if you just sit down and like look at your laptop all day at home. But I found, do you listen to or do you follow Cal Newport at all?
I used to.
Yeah.
I read a couple of his books and I listened to his
So good, I can't
podcast,
ignore
which is
you.
really good. Yeah, he's big on like deep work and like just productivity. Like he's a computer scientist, but like he's popular for deep work and productivity. His last episode talked about creativity hacking. So different ways that you can sort of like invoke a sense of creativity and not just like productivity and output. And he covered multiple different takes. So like that's one key feature of creativity is that there's no one way. But a lot of what he talked about was interaction with other ideas. Like Nassim Taleb had some piece of advice that like if you're a scientist, you should go to parties, which is totally paradoxical to what you would think a scientist should do. But this cross-pollination of like random scattershot ideas often inspires the next experiment or the next like hypothesis that you have. And it's hard to quantify that, but I feel like every time we get together for an offsite or if I'm just casually working, even with people who are like in the same industry, we'll talk for a long time and I won't get as much like pure work done, but I'll come away with a ton of ideas that I wouldn't have had otherwise. And
yeah,
I don't know, there's value to that.
I can see that. We had a group trip in mid-July for a friend's 30th. And one of the girls that was there had just opened her own med spa. So like Botox, facials, all that stuff back in Kentucky. Totally different than what we do. But like as two business owners, we like talked through all of these things. And it was so cool because I was like, I don't feel like I get, first of all, I mean, I talk to you guys on the team a lot. So we're all honed in on our industry and everything. But besides that, like when do you ever really brainstorm or talk through with someone who's in a completely different world? And it was very cool. I feel like I got some ideas and I also got some like empathy for people who work in person in an office every day, like a very manual work environment. So yeah, I can relate.
Anyway, we've all got our preferences here. I think I do like aspects of remote work, but we should probably dive into topics du jour. Yeah.
Yeah. I think, what are the topics? We're talking about learnings from hiring, looking for analytics expertise, maybe a couple other things that fall out of that conversation. Where do you want to start?
Well, lessons from hiring is a very interesting one. We've been doing a lot of hiring, and Allie probably mostly is going to have interesting. Maybe we could split this into two sides, which is like the lessons for candidates, because I'm sure you've got just pattern recognition at this point say like, hey, this stands out. Hey, this is like, like I can see how I would optimize this resume or this cover letter or like whatever piece, they're using to pitch and get in the door. And then I'd love to talk about things from our side, like maybe even just to discuss like how we can flag for certain traits and like which traits you should try to test for in interviews. Like that's been something I've been pondering quite a bit, especially in trying to hire an SEO content strategist. Like there's certain traits that are hard to identify until kind of you see their work. So maybe we should start with just the general hiring lessons.
Yeah. Well, our initial screen is somewhat standardized. I think we take it in different directions based on where the conversation goes, but some of the questions are pretty standard, and that's allowed me to kind of compare across the board, both in how people answer and like the tone of voice when answering. And I mean, speaking of remote work, I mean, interviewing remotely is really difficult too. I think really getting a sense of someone and especially the folks that opt to take camera off, which is always very interesting to me. But yeah, I think, we ask a question, what are your weaknesses? Which is a pretty tough one, right? Kind of standard.
Is this in the interview itself or is this in the application?
No, okay, so our application is lengthier than most.
Very long.
Let's talk about the application process, because I think there's some lessons that we haven't talked about before. And maybe these are probably like idiosyncratic and unique to us, but there are some things that we do differently to filter out candidates. Because you get thousands, hundreds, or like you get so many applicants, right?
We got like over 120. And that was only the folks that had filled out the application. We got a lot of like apply starters on LinkedIn, which are folks just, to my understanding, clicking like I'm interested, or they apply via their LinkedIn profile, I think.
Yeah, it like auto-populates on LinkedIn or something, right? But
it doesn't come to Polymer.
Yeah, like on LinkedIn, it says like, go to this link to apply, which it says a lot that they don't even go to that link to apply, and they just click the LinkedIn button.
Right.
Those are literally the details.
Literally minimal effort. They didn't even try.
So that's a big one. Follow the details. Like, if I could give any advice, do you want to talk about the Brown M&Ms clause?
You talk about it. That's your idea.
Yeah. So Van Halen used to put in their rider, which is like this list of criteria for basically, I think whatever position, like sets up the band backstage, they would put in their rider, they wanted M&Ms in the room, and they wanted all of the brown M&Ms removed. And this is like this micro detail just to see if the person was paying attention to the details, right? Like they didn't care about brown M&Ms. It was just something to say, yes, this person read the entire thing. They would bury it within a bunch of other pretty normal requests as well. So we always put brown M&Ms clause. This is something I learned when I was hiring freelance writers way back in the day at CXL. Something simple, a passcode. I would say use the subject line, "Hi, I'm a writer," or something like that. And then you would be shocked. Probably 40 to 50% of people wouldn't follow that. So immediately I'm like, okay, we're going to be working together. I'm going to be giving creative briefs, content briefs, like these are going to have instructions. And you didn't read the instructions on the initial application. Like that's an immediate red flag.
Yeah. And there's like the flip side of like, oh, what if it's a great candidate and just missed it? I'm like, I'd rather accidentally miss a great like a few great quote great candidates and save my time than like let those filter through and then like have a shitty interview. Like,
yeah,
I'd rather save my time and like have more confidence in who I'm going to speak to.
Yeah, it's like the false positive, false negative thing. Like I think like with the like depends what position you're hiring for and how you're hiring and who you are and all of that stuff. But as a business owner, like we don't have endless time. So obviously we need to filter a certain percent. And there probably are going to be very talented people that just didn't, for some reason, pay attention to the details that day. But
it's been an interesting hiring season, we'll call it, the last couple of months, because it's obviously come on the heels of quite a few layoffs, which has made things great for us because we've had a lot of folks to talk to, but it's very obvious the folks that just blanket apply to everything. And like, I am sure it is very taxing to be laid off and then have to go through your job search. But in terms of in the job listing or the job description, our brown M&M is a passcode, and I've put it in a section of the job description. Very clear, the passcode is X. And part of me, when folks miss it or they're like question mark on the job application, I'm like, at the very least, you could have Control F'd passcode. Like, very least, you could have gone and found it if you didn't read the whole thing. So folks that don't, they're like, I don't know what this means. I'm like, okay. Yeah.
Or what about the people who don't even respond to the questions in the application and then just put like see resume? I'm like,
or
nope.
ask me in the interview. That's what one person said.
It's funny because part of me, the old me who would have been applying to jobs, kind of resonates with that and may have done something like that. But I also like that same me would totally empathize with the person who passed on me because I did that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Well, I think like I just counted 10 open-ended questions. Tell us about your experience with growth marketing, content marketing, and SEO. Tell us about how you think about building a growth strategy. Pretty in-depth stuff. And there was a couple people that told me, they're like, it took me a while to fill out, but like it really got me thinking. And I actually utilized a lot of my answers for LinkedIn posts or sections of my resume. So if anything, it's just like getting you thinking, which is like the whole point of all of this. So if it's really that much of a drag or it's hard for you to answer these questions, then maybe you shouldn't be filling it out in the first place.
Yeah, I'll speak from like the hiring manager standpoint. What we're trying to do with multiple phases of review, so like the application stage, the discovery interview phase, the team interview phase, and the project phase, it looks different at every company. Typically what you're trying to do is phase gate and filter at each level, because you're going to have, let's say, 1,000 candidates apply. You want to narrow that down so you're only speaking to, it depends on the company, right? Like 10, 50, like whatever that number is. Could be 100 at big companies. But at each level, you're really doing an exclusionary principle. You're seeing who you can rule out, so you can spend more time on those later interview rounds that you actually get much more detail and insight on if the candidate is going to be a good fit for the job. It's very difficult to do that in the first interview. It's really, really hard to do just based on a resume. So it's kind of an exclusion practice in the early stages. Does that make sense? We're trying to filter early on.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, if you think about the funnel, it's like all the people who saw the LinkedIn job posting and like the actual job description. There's the people who clicked apply on LinkedIn and just like dropped off because we didn't see the application. There's the people who got to the job listing, didn't apply. There's people who applied without the passcode, like which filters out like I think we had 120, you said, applications, Allie, and maybe we spoke to 30 of them, 40 maybe.
I probably spoke to 50, but by the time I made it to you guys, it was even less than that.
Yeah. And then like of the people that we got to like a presentation or project was less than 10, I think, right? So that's like crazy filtering. And of those folks, like you just did top grading with one, Allie, you've probably spent 10 hours speaking to this one person and more time getting like references and back channeling. So
if we think thinking, because we do sales, if we think of it from like the sales standpoint, there are certain prospects that towards like the, like when you're nearing towards the contract stage, you're spending quite a bit of time and effort, and you're talking to multiple stakeholders, C-suite, et cetera. Your lawyer's running through the contract, their lawyer's running through the contract. So you want to make sure that by the time you're at that phase, they're actually qualified. So like in our sales process, we've got a form that filters out a certain amount of people who are under budget or just don't have the right service needs. And then my first call that I have with them, the most of what I'm doing is just figuring out if they're actually going to be a viable candidate that I want to move forward with. It's not, I'm not trying to sell them. I'm trying to figure out if they are worthwhile to work with, because towards the later stages, you really want it to be much more customized. You want a much more hands-on, personalized approach. And you just can't do that with everybody. It's like an opportunity cost.
yeah, it's like, Allie, when you were out, I kind of started driving the process, and I was like, I don't have time to come up with like custom questions for just screening. And I just made it standardized. It was like same like 8 to 10 questions. And they're kind of generic superficially, but my favorite questions are like, what are 3 to 5 things that you're really good at professionally? And I followed up with like, what are 3 to 5 things you're not good at or you're not interested in doing? And it seems simple to superficially, but once they answer, it tells you a lot about how they think about themselves and whether they're self-aware, and like if they describe how they describe like why they're not good at something is also really interested. Or like them just telling you what they're not interested in doing. It's like, oh, that's a core part of the job. Okay, don't want.
And that's
you.
flagging for self-awareness. I always try to think about what dimensions we're trying to flag for with these questions. Self-awareness seems to be a big one. At least David, with your questions and criteria. One thing I wanted to note on the application too, and Allie, I don't know if you specifically use this to filter out candidates, but back to the remote talk, we're a remote first company. We are fully remote. And I think we ask in the interview or the application, why do you want to work here? Which is like the most basic question. It's like, what's your reason? What's your drive? And a large percent of people will say something like, because it's remote. And it's like that is certainly something that we are, but that's not a reason to like, that's okay. Like think of it from the company side. Like, think of it from your side, first off. If you're a candidate, is that really why you want a job? Like, just because it's remote? Like, like, I would implore you to think a little bit further about what you actually want to be doing. Maybe it is, but like a startup or like a small company is probably not going to like that. So from the company side, what we hear is like, well, that doesn't say anything about the value that you bring to the business. Like, all that says is like, hey, you just want it's convenient. Like, I don't know. Like it doesn't. Yeah. That rubs me the wrong way. I really want to find like the drive, because that can supersede a lack of skills in some candidates. Like if you have the right vision with where you want to go, and this position in our company aligns with that, and you've got a growth mindset, that can, if you don't have the adequate skills, that can actually like replace that in some cases.
There's a few things that come to mind. One, I respect folks who are pursuing a remote position, especially if they haven't been in one before. I mean, you've got new mothers, like a lot of situations. That doesn't need to be your driving factor to apply. Just don't mention it. Like, I respect it. Don't mention it. It's not going to help your case. Two, going back to the question, David, that you said about like 3 to 5 things you're good at. I always ask why. I always ask like, why you think you're good at these? And then, the alternative to that question that I always ask is like either the weaknesses, and sometimes I phrase it as like, what are you not good at? Like what are your not strengths? What would you say you want to improve on? And it's interesting because folks will either frame that as like, I hate XYZ, which tells me they are not interested in improving those things. Or they're like, I haven't had a chance to touch this, or I've always wanted to improve on this. So they frame it as like, I'm not good at it, I'm fully aware of that, but I'd be willing to learn, or I'd be willing to like dig deeper, which is awesome. And going back to the why of like, why do you want to work here? Why did you take a call with me? Some of the folks that I've pushed through the process, their whys haven't always aligned with what we can offer, or maybe it's something that's like later down the road, and that's completely fine with me.
That's a very good thing to learn early on.
It's a very good thing, because I'm like,
for the candidate too.
One, you've thought through your future. Two, you've chosen a path that will probably change, and that's okay, but you've chosen it. Three, you're not reading me the job description. Some people did that. And four, like, you're an independent thinker. You're driven without someone pushing you. And for this role specifically, the strategist role, very much relevant to the skill set this person will need to have. Working alone, sometimes setting strategy alone, building relationships with clients alone. They're going to have to like set the stage, be willing to grow in that. So thinking of those dimensions you mentioned, Alex, that's a lot of what comes to mind.
I want to mention another one too, because I don't even know if I've told you this, but a recent question that it's not even a question really, it's more of an exercise that I've been doing, tests for those weaknesses and strengths. But what I do is, this is an SEO strategist, right? I don't think we index incredibly heavily on the like most technical depth. Right? Like I'm not asking like how you do screaming frog analyses or like log file, and like there's none of that in the interview. But what I do is I frame it like, hey, let's paint a picture. Like SEO is this very composite thing made up of a bunch of pillars. There's a bunch of things that go into SEO, right? That are pretty discrete functions. In the same way that CRO includes web design and UX, and also A/B testing and statistics, and also like all of these things kind of form together to create CRO. So I'm like, what would you put in this bucket of SEO? Like, what are the pillars? And I'll start out, I'll be like, probably technical SEO is one. What else would you put in that? And this is to gauge structured thinking. So this is to basically say, how do you take apart a radio, find its composite parts, and put it back together so it's still a radio? And the other thing I'll do is I'll often throw like a random answer in there that's probably not like definable as something that goes into SEO, and I'll see if they like agree or push back, because that's sort of like, all right, are they like, do they have strong stances and strong opinions on this stuff? And then I'll go in and ask like, what's your best, worst, and the one that you most want to learn? Because just because it's the worst thing, your worst skill, doesn't mean it's necessarily the one that you want to learn. Yeah. I'm probably the weakest on technical SEO, but that's not the area that I'm most interested in learning. So I found that to be really helpful. The structured thinking thing is a very hard thing to test for.
As always, this has been taught to me since I was in high school. The questions you ask in interviews go a very long way. I don't know if you guys agree with me, but I personally index very heavily on what kind of questions folks ask, and how much they feel genuinely curious by that, versus reading off a list of like 10 questions to ask in your interview. Those are great questions, but like use that as a jumping off point, not like don't print it and read it. There have been some folks that have come in, they're like, I don't have any questions. And
that's really? A red flag. I think too, because like we're the founders of the company, like there's like a very interesting opportunity to learn a lot about the business and our vision. So I really respect when people do that. This may be just me, but I really love when people put me on my toes a little bit. When they ask me very specific and like difficult questions about sales, revenue, the future of the company. I'm like, man, these are good questions.
Yeah. Well, especially as a strategist who has to learn their client's business. Like the curiosity element of the role is very important. So if you're not curious about the business that you might be working for, is the sales pipeline healthy? Like, how'd you guys get started? Like what, like all generic stuff, like how's the partnership? I had a couple people ask me that because they're really wanting to work for a healthy team. Like those kind of things, even if they're not directly relevant to the role, it's like, again, that intangible dimension that we're looking for.
Yeah. I remember when I was interviewing at HubSpot, I had an interview with Kip, and he recently wrote a blog post. It was something like marketers ruin everything, something. It was a take on like how so many marketing tactics have been beaten down to the most sensationalist, worst outcomes. And I asked some question in the interview because a lot of what he had talked about, HubSpot was either complicit in or a driving force of. So I was like, look, you wrote this blog post, but like, what are you actually doing about that within HubSpot's marketing program? And it was like it felt confrontational, but the way he answered it was so accepting. So like he took it in stride and gave actually a very good answer. And to me, like I was looking at multiple different options for my career, and that spoke very highly of HubSpot. They were willing to be flexible. They were willing to admit when they had done certain things that, you know, they're like, hey, we don't want to do things like that anymore. I was like, that's the kind of leadership I would want to have, you know?
It's funny that it literally just reminded me of I had an interview with Kip too, and I was very surprised that I did, because I interviewed with Jamie, I interviewed with Megan, and then Kip, and I remember he logged on and he was at the end of this really long conference table, and I'm like, is this an intimidation tactic? Like I don't know what's
Vladimir Putin during COVID.
You said
do you remember that photo?
Well, anyway, like my question to him was like, if you like restarted this is paraphrased, but I was like, if you started your marketing career over, what job or what team would you want to join here at HubSpot? Because there's a lot of entry level. I was entry level at the time. And he said the blog team. And I was like, are you just saying that because that's the role I'm interviewing for? I literally countered him. He's like, no. And then he gave his whole explanation. But at the end, he told me, he's like, that was a really interesting question. I've never been asked that. And I just feel like that back and forth, like I want clients, I want candidates to be interviewing me as much as I'm interviewing them, because that shows that they have like stake in their career. They're taking it very seriously and they want to vet us out as well. So I think that that's very underrated. A lot of folks don't take the time to be curious.
I will say, just for anybody listening, there is a fine line between asking difficult questions and being confrontational and antagonistic.
Yeah,
and I would not want anybody to take this lesson away that you should fight people in interviews. Like that's probably not a good way to get in the door.
I don't think anybody had been like that.
No. Thankfully.
This conversation is making me think about when I last interviewed for my head of growth role like 2 years ago. And I remember feeling a lot more confident in myself, and it was like a leadership role. So maybe it was expected that I came in this way, but I essentially ran the interviews. I remember, like, I kicked off the conversation. I was like, I have a list of questions for you. And they're like, well, I have questions too. I'm like, great, well, I'll start. I would just ran the conversation.
Great, I'll start.
And I'd be like, if a candidate did that to me, I'd be like, okay, like, let's go. Like, I respect it so much, but
it would pique my curiosity.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
It's like Leo in Django Unchained. It's like, you had my curiosity. Now you have my attention.
It's like, what is this person doing? I guess I'll go along with it.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
That's amazing.
What else on hiring? So, like, that's a lot of, like, filtering and, like, what we're specifically looking for. And I think probably a lot of business owners are looking for.
I think we sort of started like talking about like the idea of curiosity, and I think like we do a take home project, and then there's a presentation aspect, and then there's like a think on your toes exercise, analytics exercise in a live presentation as well. Alex, I know this is something you've been thinking about, but like analytics expertise, we're not looking for someone who's like an analyst, but we want some traits of an analyst in this person.
Yeah, let's go into that in 1 second. I just first want to say something about like projects, because I think this is to the benefit of anybody doing projects, anybody interviewing right now. I just want to like make clear what people are looking for when you're asked to do a project. If it's going to be work that's actually used by the company, it should never be free. First off, just like if it's going to be used like for the value of their business, they should pay for it. We do hypotheticals. What we're looking for is not the right answers. We're looking for underlying thinking processes, especially with regards to the analytics portion of that. We're never looking for somebody who's like, oh, here's the exact thing that's going on, because frankly, there is no exact answer. And if you said that, that would be a little concerning, right? That's a lot of assumptions when you're dealing with data. Same thing on like any strategy side, any keyword side. Like, we're looking for how you think about problem solving, how you deconstruct things, and then also how you present it. Like, how clean is your presentation, your communication? I would say those are the things I'm looking for. Do you agree? What else would you add?
Oh, yeah. Like, I want to see how someone thinks. We give, like you said, hypotheticals. There's not a ton of context to work with how we present the project. So part of me, I'm not making it complicated on purpose, but I am understanding how someone might work within a layer of ambiguity, a little bit of chaos, because that's somewhat how our projects at least start, right? Setting a baseline, like discussing like what can we assume, where are we going to start, what do I pull from this information? Kind of like we said in the beginning of our conversation, like it's better to come in wrong than it is empty-handed, and then give it a chance for the team to discuss and iterate. But anyway, back to the project. Yeah, definitely critical thinking, definitely a bit of analysis. I want to see what folks can do without like a ton of extra tooling. We don't provide access to our tooling. And honestly, you can do a lot with just Google and free tools anyway. So it really speaks to someone's willingness to go in depth, maybe like stake a flag and figure out how to go from there. Yeah, I would agree with what you said.
This is true of most. So we have a specific role. It's a strategist, and strategy is something that can't be boxed in any like playbook way. So like you obviously need a lot of autonomy and critical thinking and like how you position strategy. But even so, Facebook, when they interview product managers, they have a component where they do a live SQL test. All PMs there write a little bit of SQL, even though they have analysts. And what they do is they give you a couple weeks to prepare and like learn the basics, the 101 level stuff. There's free courses out there. But during the interview, the project, they're not testing your SQL knowledge. They're testing how you would approach the problem once you have those basic vocabulary words in SQL. They're seeing your thinking process live. That's why they ask you to do it live. So I'm sure there's cases where you are testing skill, but for the most part, what you're testing is thinking.
Yeah, what I've found is not hard. What I found that we haven't seen very frequently is structured thinking. Like, I think a lot of candidates tend to hear a question and then jump to an answer immediately versus taking a breath or even asking, hey, can I get 2 minutes to think about this before I respond? And then coming back and like, all right, I'll think about this in this way. Here are 3 things. 1, 2, 3. The first one would be blah, blah, blah. The second one, like, it doesn't even have to be the right answers, but usually it's someone kind of rambling through a bunch of different things and maybe eventually getting to a halfway decent answer. But I imagine if they kind of took a breath, kind of structured their thinking first and then responded, that would be a lot more clear and honestly they would get a lot of brownie points if they did that. But maybe it's just the nature of the seniority or like level of experience of some of these folks that we've been interviewing.
Yeah, that reminded me of one more thing actually, and maybe structured thinking, but critical thinking. A lot of the times when you probe for the reasons behind certain decisions, there's not much there. It's sort of a blanket statement or a little rambling around and buzzwords like customer experience or the customer centric, and it's like nobody would argue with that, but it doesn't really mean much. Mm-hmm. So I think like having clear justifications and being able to go 2 layers down. You know, if you're brought in to do a conversion rate optimization strategy project and, you know, you recommend 10 changes to the homepage and they're like, why would you do this? You can't just say, you know, because it looks good or because it's good UX. You got to be like, well, here's the thinking process that went into why I would make this decision. That's what you're looking for.
Yeah, like our hypothetical prompts were through the lens of 2 different companies, and the folks that answered the why through that context of like this company or this ICP or this whatever, that using that as part of their reasoning gained a lot more points for me than just generic best practices. That really took it a step farther and had me understanding that they took the time to acclimate themselves to the prompt and treated it like they would if it was a real client.
And they think for themselves. Let's do the analytics thing. So as part of this specific role, being analytically inclined is a heavy leading indicator of success. As you're building and maintaining SEO strategy, when you build an SEO strategy, a lot of data goes into that. When you're maintaining it, a lot of analysis and iterative learning goes into it. It's not like you have to be an analyst by trade. It's just being able to grok data, to be able to ask good questions, to be able to find the right resources to find the answers to situations where clients bring up questions. That's a big component. So David and I were just randomly chatting the other day about what level of analytics experience should SEOs have, or content marketers? And what can you train, and what can you not train, or what should you test for as like a baseline, almost like characteristic or dimension of the person? So I don't know if we have answers here. It was more of just, we thought it would be worth discussing.
Yeah, I think for me, I actually wrote a LinkedIn post about this that should go out like next week or something, but I put myself in their shoes, and I'm like, what if I were shown this data with no context, what kind of questions would I have? And there's this chart with a very clear outlier in it. Like, it's a chart of conversions, and then all of a sudden there's a huge spike where it's like triple or quadruple the previous month, and it goes back to normal. And we've had a range of reactions to that. And I think at this point, we kind of expect it to be like a talking point. Some folks say, oh, that looks great. Something good must have happened here. I wonder what happened. And then they'll move on. And then for me, I'd be like, what the hell happened here? Can we trust this data? Has anyone validated it? Like, do we have any other data we can cross-reference with? What else happened in that month? Did you do a one-off campaign? Like, is there something that all of a sudden you shot up in the rankings for? Like, there are a lot of questions you can dig into. But it's like, those are the types of questions that I'm personally looking for when you see whether it's a good trend or a bad trend. Like, you can probably ask the same type of questions, but I haven't heard too much of that yet.
Well, I think those aspects are very difficult to train a coach and somebody that doesn't have them. So you're speaking towards curiosity. I almost so I did a podcast with my high school English teacher the other day, and she asked the best questions on a podcast I've ever been on, I think. And one of them, she was noting that I have both of kind of an analytical career and mindset as well as a writing. And, I went through journalism school at Wisconsin. She's like, are those two at odds? Like, how do you kind of reconcile those two sides of your brain? And I was like, actually, those are, like, in my mind, those are the most in common. Like, yeah, a journalist, like an analyst is like a journalist. Like, I think you're in both career paths or in both mindsets. You're a deeply curious person who is asking the best possible questions to get to a kernel of truth or an insight. Mm-hmm. And whether you have the tools to get to that insight or not is kind of irrelevant, unless you're hiring for a New York Times investigative journalist or a digital analyst at SAP or something. But it's that ability to be like, that's really interesting. I wonder. And then like the wonder goes into multiple questions that kind of branch down. So we had it on one of our interviews where a candidate was going through and was noting like the high referral traffic and was like, oh, this is a good trend. There's a lot of websites linking to us. And in my brain, I was like, holy shit, that is a lot of referral traffic. I've never seen that much referral traffic at a website ever. So then I started going down this path. I'm like, is that normal? Like, what could possibly causing that level of referral traffic? Mm-hmm. And I'm going to be honest with you too. Like, I've done a lot of Google Analytics training in my life, but I haven't really dove into GA4 at the level that I should have. I just Googled a couple quick things with how to look at this stuff in GA4 and just kind of poked around and found an anomaly in the data. And I was like, oh, that's why this is happening. But it was really like, that's interesting. And then like going down those multiple layers, and that's the trait that is very important, at least in this role.
Yeah, David, you've asked a couple
rabbit holes.
Yeah, you've asked a couple folks like, how would you verify that this information is correct? And I think, given the state of digital analytics of 2023, there's been a lot of movement, like Universal with Sunset, GA4, all this stuff. Also using these kind of tools to spit out data and trends. Like, there could be things that are broken. So it has been interesting seeing folks react or not react to big numbers, like the referral traffic spikes, like the conversions. There's another chart that has like clicks going down or impressions going down, but clicks going up, and things that should raise flags of like, is that right? Like, I would dig into this. I would verify before I would iterate on this. Like, just like layers of thinking and almost being questioning all the time. That's how I think another way that the journalist and analyst brains are the same is just like always questioning things, always verifying.
That dashboard has so much shit to question.
That's why I picked it.
Amazing.
It's a minefield. Yeah.
I know.
Yeah.
And the funny thing is, I just met with that client, and one of the first questions was like, why is that spike so high? Like, can we double check that the event is set up correctly? And I was like, from my end it is, but y'all do your digging. Like, it was the first thing out of his mouth. And I was like, okay, yeah, because that's what a client would look at.
I want to try to answer the question of like how analytical content or SEO people should be, and totally ignore the nuance of that question, because obviously it's like, it depends. So I'll give you my take and let me know what you think here. I think that if strategist is in your title, you should have a very analytical mind. I think whether it's SEO strategist or content strategist or social strategist, any channel strategist, I think you are in some ways a generalist. You've specialized in a channel, but like you have to compile multiple data points, pattern connect, learn from the data that's available, figure out where you don't have data that you need data, and use that to inform your strategy. I think that's just inherent in the role. I think SEO in general, no matter what you're doing in SEO, you probably have to have a pretty strong grasp on analytics, including web analytics. Like I would personally, if I'm in that field, I'm learning GA4, whatever tools are available, potentially HubSpot. If you're in content, I think if you're a content writer, it depends where you want to go in your career. I would say personally that I've benefited immensely from learning analytics, even when it wasn't my core job. I think if you're a content writer, I would call that almost a creative, like a producer, right? Mm-hmm. Whether it's a social producer, a blogger, something like that. I actually don't care that much if you have an analytical mind. I think producing the absolute best piece of creative work, given the specs, is your, like, that's a huge value add, right? And that's my take, I guess. Like, I don't know what you guys think.
Yeah, I mean, I was a writer, and then I became like a marketing manager, more responsible for analytics. I think at the end of the day, when it comes to content and SEO that roll up into a marketing function, ultimately you're trying to, I don't know, it all comes back to that adage of like customer first and blah, blah, blah. But like you're really trying to like make money, right? And doing that by better like serving your customers or whatever. And there are two ways to understand how to do that. One is through talking with them, understanding them. The other is through tracking their behavior and understanding their behavior. So it's like the latter, you have to have that data. You have to know how to collect it, ask the right questions, read it, and use it to make decisions. So like the depth with which you do that varies, like Alex said, but there's got to be a foundational layer there and a willingness to learn that whole side of things. And it comes later, I think, in content marketers' careers, at least, unless you're just super hungry and curious early on. But it's not always comfortable, especially if you have a creative mind, and that's why you got into the field in the first place. But it can really, really help you make better decisions that go much, much farther than like, this just feels right. Or like, I just had this epiphany the other day. Because people are going to be like, why, how, where'd that come from? Pointing to numbers, can't really refute that.
Yeah, I think our team has a pretty unique combination of skills and personalities. Like, we've had people call us mathy on different occasions, and it's different people saying that. And it's almost like it's not expected for a content or SEO agency to be mathy. And when I think about each, like the three of us and some of our team members, like Alex, you were a musician, and Allie, like you write fiction, and I used to like dance and I love music, and Sam used to be in like branding and music, like, but we also have this other skill set of like being a lot more analytical and like logistics, and Sam like is a 6 Sigma green belt, which we need to give him his black belt. Like, we have such an interesting combination of strengths that maybe that's like our differentiator and we lead into it more. But when I think of other content agencies, maybe they lean a little too much on like the production side of things and not enough on the, I don't know what you call the other side.
Yeah, but that's fine if they're a content writing agency. Like, if that's their core competency, that they're going to produce content beautifully within specs. Like, I don't necessarily need them to be an analyst or like to have a strategic mind. But if you're an SEO agency and you're not building reports that map back the results to your efforts, I think that is malpractice. It's insane that there would be any SEO agencies that would do that. So, and I also think like on the musician, writer, like all of that, like I think that one of the common things, totally aside by the way, one of the common things that I've learned from my podcast interviews and multiple chats is that every SEO, it was once a musician or still is, you know, like they're either a DJ or like played in a band. So there is this weird mind where there's like this creativity with the math. You were in a
Middle school
band?
band. My middle school band.
Oh,
I was first
gotcha.
chair flute, so same thing.
I was hoping you'd say like metalcore, but
Yeah.
real shame. I do think with the analytics, I'll add one more point. There is a point of diminishing returns because early in my career, I got really into this side of things and learned R and Python and SQL and took a course on machine learning and artificial intelligence. And I was like building classifiers. And I was like, you know what? I'm not going to be the best at this. I enjoy having somebody on my team who is the best at this stuff. And I'm never going to be, my classifier model was like 50% accurate, you know? And yeah, it just depends where you want to go in your career. I think I look at an SEO like maybe a product manager. And a product manager typically has an analyst as a resource. But if the product manager doesn't understand data to save their life, they're probably not the best product manager they could be, right? If they don't know how to grasp like what questions to ask, what business questions to ask, if the data is feasibly available, and if it's not, how it would be set up, like then they're not going to ask the analyst good questions, and they're not going to get the most value from the analyst. So that's kind of how I look at that function.
Yeah, and being able to tell stories or like really explain what the data means, especially if you're in an agency setting where clients probably don't have that much experience with data or they're focused elsewhere. So being able to pull the numbers and be like, this is what these things mean, and here's what we're going to do with that information. So at least being able to do that, maybe not having to do like all the data pulls and all the navigating through all the data, but being
Now
able
you're
to
getting
use
into the murky waters of reporting versus analytics.
Oh God.
Oh no.
You know what I'm talking about.
It's, by the way, it's always a pet peeve of mine when people like refer to them the same and just call it reporting. It's like, yeah, like just show a report, trend goes up.
Oh,
like, what?
I hate that.
It's like, what are we learning from
go
that? Stocks go up.
Why? I don't know. All right. Well, hopefully this helps hiring managers. I don't know, I think it's fun sharing all of these learnings as we're going through them versus, I don't know, people sharing them later down the line and it's not even applicable anymore. Like,
Yeah.
This is a pretty unique environment to be hiring with lots of layoffs and lots of people in the market and maybe people having different salary expectations because it was all inflated before. I don't know. I'm very curious about how it all plays out.
I know personally that I want to hear more from people in the weeds too, like going through the thing at the moment. I remember when I was at Lawn Starter, Steve, the CEO, wrote a post about that. He's like, look, like I love reading entrepreneur advice from VCs. It's fine, but they were in the arena 10 years ago. Also, by the way, that Chamath thing within the, have you guys seen that? I won't go into it, but he said some cringy quote about how he's like, I'm making decisions. I'm in the arena. Some work, some don't, but I'm in the arena. He's getting blasted on Twitter right now. But anyway, the phrase is common. It's, you know, like, so I love reading stuff from people who are actively going through it and haven't figured out every little piece yet, but hearing their actual experience, I love that. So hopefully, I mean, I'm sure some of our takes aren't universal, but we're going through it.
Yeah.
So
maybe we should link to this podcast episode in our future job listings too. It's like, here's to know what exactly to expect in the interview process and what we want to see.
Oh yeah. That'd be
Literally
good.
all the answers.
I like it.
I think we'll call it.
Cool.
We're going to call it. Peace.